I thought it was just a little intro. Today we're going to cover basically what's in chapter 1. I added in a bunch of my own slides to it, but it's basically just, again, the basics of economics. We're talking about individual choice, how people interact, that kind of stuff. So first, like we were talking about a little bit last class, people make choices as they try to attain their goals. Can you hear me fine with this mask on? Okay. Choices are necessary because we live in a world of scarcity. So we want a lot of stuff, and we don't have enough resources to get it all. So we have to decide what we want the most and what we want a lot least, create a hierarchy of wants and needs. Now, scarcity, the definition, this is like the common definition. The situation in which unlimited wants exceeds the limited resources available to fulfill those wants. So there's always more that you want than you're able to get. So the economics, what we do is study the choices that people make to attain their goals, given the fact that there's scarce resources. Because we can't get everything we want, we need to choose between those things. And how do we choose? How do we weigh those options? How do people differ in what they want and what they go after? That's what we're doing here. So we're going to use economic models, simplified versions of reality, so we could analyze real-world situations. There's a marker today. The most common one we'll use is just supply and demand. You don't need to write this down yet because it'll be in enough of future slides. Basically, you have the demand curve, which is consumers. Supply curve is producers. We'll use this very simple model with price and quantity to determine how different things will change what ends up happening. So it could be a price change, it could be more of a product, there could be less demand. Obviously, there's a ton of things that this doesn't take into account. But if we want to know what the effect is of an increase in demand, say, because the COVID masks are way more popular, right? People are wearing masks now. That's going to increase the demand curve. So what's going to happen? The price used to be here. The price is now up here. Doesn't tell you everything that's going to happen. Doesn't of all the things going on in the world. But if you want to understand what the effect of COVID is and the increase in demand is on prices for masks, you can understand it using this. So it has its uses, but it's not the end-all be-all. So here are some typical economics questions that a textbook has, and these are kind of things we'll be talking about in this class. So how are the prices of goods and services determined? We'll be using supply and demand a lot for that. We'll also be using cost curves to look at how firms determine their pricing a little bit. How does pollution affect the economy? How should the government policy deal with these effects? What are the different choices the government can do? And which of these is the best? Why do firms engage in international trade? And how do government policies affect international trade? And why does the government control the prices of some goods and services? And what are the effects of those controls? There will be plenty of other things we talk about in this class, but these are just some questions, some things people talk about that you'll hopefully be able to answer by the end of the class. At least can think about in a slightly different light. So the textbook says there's 3 main economic questions, so I'll run through these. The first is what goods and services will be produced? So individuals, firms, governments, all these different parties, they have to decide on what goods and services are going to be produced. An increase in production of one good means there's going to be less resources available to produce other goods. Again, this is because of scarcity. So there's a trade-off that if you want to produce more of one thing, you're going to get less of that other thing. So if we devote more resources to pizza, there's going to be less left for other types of food. Or something completely different, not even food. So the highest valued alternative given up in order to engage in some activity is called opportunity cost. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. But for a quick example, so you can understand what that means, the opportunity cost for increased funding for space exploration or the brand new Space Force might be giving up the opportunity to fund cancer research or schools. That there's other potential uses for those resources. Next is, how will the goods and services be produced? Once we've determined what we should produce, how are we going to do it? So a firm might have several different methods. Different firms might all have different methods about how to produce a good or a service. So a music producer can make a song sound good by hiring a great singer, using standard techniques, having, the band there with the singer. Or you can use auto-tune to correct all the problems with their voice, smooth it over, or just make a cool new sound. So these music producers, they have choices about how to make good music. Next is if the cost of a manufacturing firm, if their labor costs change, a firm could respond by changing its production technique. So you have more machines and fewer workers. That way, in the long run, it's cheaper because you have lower labor costs. Or you can just pick up and move your factory to a location with cheaper labor. And then finally, who will receive the goods and services produced? So in the United States, what we do typically is people with higher incomes or that have more money available obtain more goods and services. Now, there are changes in tax and welfare policies that can change the distribution of income. Obviously, this is highly contentious based on your political beliefs. There are also other ways. There are other ways to determine who gets what goods. The first is centrally planned economy. Think of like the old school Soviet Union or like Cuba now. So the government decides how resources will be allocated. They decide what firms are going to produce, how they're going to produce them, and who gets the final goods. The market economy describes pretty much the United States, where households and firms interact with each other, and through the marketplace, they allocate resources. And there's a mixed economy, where most economic decisions result from the market, where you have buyers and sellers coming together. But the government also plays a significant role in the allocation of resources. Different times in US history, there's been price controls, there's been government directly providing goods and services. So we're somewhere between a mixed economy and a market economy, because the market is used much more often to determine the allocation of resources than the government is. There are also other ways. Oh, yeah.
Are there any solid examples of mixed economy? Like, did you argue like EU or maybe like South Korea?
Yeah, my first, I would say some European countries. Singapore is a very weird example. They like the government provided housing for a lot of their workers. So basically, if you see the government involved in running businesses or in determining like where the output should go. But yeah, mixed economies are pretty hard to have. You'll tend either more towards centrally planned or more towards market. So yeah, there are other ways to determine. If you don't use centrally planned and you don't use the price and market mechanism, it's not really a concern here. It's not really a concern anywhere this year, I guess. But if you're looking to get student tickets for a Penn State football game, like as a student, it's first come, first serve. Or at least it was like when my friends went there. So they say tickets are available at 8 a.m. You go on 8 a.m., you just refresh a page until it lets you in. So it's great if you're first in line. But if you really need something, you're at the back of the line, you're out of luck. And obviously there's like dumb things you could do, like you could base it off of height or connections, attractiveness, any of those things. Probably wouldn't be the best idea, but I mean, they are alternatives. A textbook notes that markets may not result in fully efficient outcomes. They talk about, I cut out a couple slides about They talk about how markets are really good for efficient outcomes, but they're not perfect. So people might not immediately do things in the most efficient way. I should have proofed this slide ahead of time. People will not immediately do things the most efficient way. We are constantly learning new things and learning better production techniques. So yeah, but in no, whether it's central plan, mixed economy, market economy, you will always have people not doing things the most efficient way because they don't know any better. Knowledge is costly and it's difficult to obtain. The governments might interfere with market outcomes, whether it's through regulation, through taxes, through redistribution of income. All these things distort market outcomes. That's not to say that's a bad thing. Maybe it's a very good thing, but it's not allowing the market to reach its full efficiency. And market outcomes might ignore the desires of people who are not involved in transactions. I don't think we're going to talk about this. I think that's mostly in 102. But an example is pollution. So there's, say, some factory near here pumping out a bunch of pollution, and we don't buy any of their products. But because we live here, we get a lot of pollution. So if you're not involved in transactions, you're not physically paying for it. That firm producing the pollution isn't going to care about you, really. At least there's no way to exert any market pressure on them. So the market's not going to take that into account. Also, economically efficient outcomes, where we have the best allocation of resources possible to have maximize the wealth in society, it might not be the most desirable thing in the world. Markets can result in high inequality, and some people may prefer far more equity, where everyone has a very similar income. Basically, what we're saying here is that markets result in very efficient outcomes if we're concerned about how much wealth, how much well-being we can compile as a society. But there's other reasons why it may not, that may not be perfect. We might want a fair distribution of income. Maybe we want more, I don't know, we want people to care more about religion in the community instead of making as much money as possible. There's always other things to consider besides purely economic efficiency. That's repeated slides, sorry. So, economics is a study of human action. And again, anytime there's choice involved, we can use the tools of economics. And this applies to all humans at all times. So this is whether people are buying and selling in the marketplace, which is mostly what we're going to talk about in this class. But there are economists who have taken these tools and applied them to other areas. So for instance, politics. You can look at how politicians are self-interested, how voters react with their imperfect knowledge, how interest groups and industry groups are able to lobby politicians to get laws passed that are favorable towards them, how bureaucracies function and how people within them work to increase their power or to get promotions within there, like a worker in anywhere in the private sector. We can also apply it to crime. Gary Becker in the 1960s was the pioneer of this. At the time, they thought that people that committed crimes there was something wrong with them, they just liked crimes. Becker was late to a PhD dissertation, and the only parking spot he could find was illegal. So he did a quick calculation in his head. He's like, all right, so the ticket will be $2. They don't come by here very often, so what are the odds that they're actually going to give me a ticket? But, all right, I think it's worth it to park here. And he pulls in, he said, wait a second. I talk about analyzing choice all the time. I just made a choice to commit a crime based on the expected payoff. Now, most of us don't actually run through the expected costs and benefits in their head, but economists are a little different, and because we think about this all the time, we often do it. But you can look at crime as just another choice that people make. I think it was Becker, too, who did family interactions, modeling how family members interact with each other, how parents discipline their children, how children interact, and things like that. And you can look at religion. The witch burnings or witch trials in Europe in the 1600s. There's some pretty strong evidence based off some research over the past decade or so that it was really competition between Protestant churches and Catholic churches trying to get the most faithful. And things like two firms competing against each other. That's basically what caused it. And like I said, this framework applies at all times. So ancient Rome experienced a hyperinflation late in their imperial period, and Zimbabwe recently experienced a hyperinflation. The same sorts of things that caused the Roman hyperinflation caused the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe. So this isn't just like these tools can explain what's going on for the past 200 years. Besides that, it's worthless. The class is more than just how to save money or what the stock market's going to do. It's how decisions in various parts of the economy affect the allocation of resources and do so in ways that will either raise or lower the material well-being of society. Usually, and especially for the past 200 years, it's typically been to raise the material well-being of society. But there are times we waste resources. There are times that entrepreneurs come up with an idea and it turns out the idea is bad, so we waste resources on that. Sorry, I copy and pasted two slideshows together, a couple repeated slides. So there's three key economic assumptions. I want you to keep this in the back of your mind while we're going through this class. The first is methodological individualism. So the individual is going to be the unit of analysis. We're not looking at groups of people. We're looking at how individual people are interacting with each other, how they're making choices. And all these social and,
What do you mean by that?
that we're looking at individuals.
Yeah, interacting with them.
So it could be how consumers are looking to buy from firms. So if you look at this demand curve, there are people all along this line that they say they value the good at, one values it right here, so whatever this price is. One values it up here. So those are two separate people that we'll be looking at. If we're looking at, if we go back to say something outside of typical economics, if we're looking at politics, we can look at how one politician interacts with the various voters in their district. A lot of times it's easy to aggregate it together and to say the voters, the consumers. But it's important to keep in the back of your mind that there's individuals acting in each one of these situations. The next idea is purposeful action. The individuals consciously act to achieve their wants. They're not just doing random things. We have goals and we seek them. And finally, economizing behavior. People consider the costs and benefits of actions. They may not write down like a little cost benefit thing on a sheet of paper and try to think everything out. But in general, it's how much is it going to cost me? What else can I use that money for? Is this thing good or is this bad? And when we act, we seek the desired ends with the lowest possible cost. So if there's a quicker way to get somewhere, a cheaper way to do something, we tend to opt to go for the cheaper one, or to the shorter trip. Now we're not always going to be right. We can be wrong, and the choice might not be what's considered best for other people. So, for example, my dad loves Little Caesars pizza. Not just likes it. If we're oh, let's get pizza tonight, what do you want? Oh, let's do Little Caesars. You can get some really good pizza from pizza shops. But he's no, it's hot and ready. It's awesome. I think that's just the thing that has gotten in his head. I know all you guys are thinking he's crazy. I think he's crazy.
I don't think it's crazy.
You don't think he's crazy? You don't think there's any better pizza out there?
Yeah, you can get a stuffed crust pizza there for like $8.
Is the stuffed crust good?
Yeah. It's really
What kind of cheese do they put in the crust?
I don't know. It's like it's I don't know. Like it's literally just tastes like you're eating a cheese, like not a mozzarella.
Okay, the first when pizza first came out with it back, I don't know, when I was like a little kid, my mom and I were so excited we went there, and it was like American cheese in the crust. Like it wasn't even pizza cheese. So I haven't had stuffed crust pizza since. Okay, so we got 2 people on Team Little Caesars, but there's much better pizza places to go. Now it's my dad, and I hate to pick on one guy in the class, but are they wrong? No, because we all have different desires, different wants. All right. Let's take a break and stop there. Even though fast food kind of sucks, what are some of your guys' favorite fast food places? We don't need to go around, but then shout a couple out and then make fun of people for picking the wrong one. Taco Bell's like the same, like 4 ingredients over and over again, just mixed up differently.
Like 8 different forms. It's so fun. Yeah. They have these things called cheesy roll-ups. It's literally a tortilla and cheese heated up, and it's like $1, and I get like 5 of them. And that's like my whole meal.
All right, anyone like Five Guys? And have like what are the fries, like the Cajun fries?
Is that even like considered fast food though? That's like
You
the
sit down.
upper tier fast food.
I don't know, when I brought this up last semester, someone said like you have to try their like Cajun fries or some kind of specially seasoned fries from
They
there.
just put like a little bit in.
They said it was really good and I haven't
Yeah,
been there.
they're good.
I haven't been there like since like it came up. So I didn't know if you guys were like, oh yeah, you have to try it.
Popeyes is pretty good.
Okay, the Popeyes are not good though. I literally went there and they said we're out of chicken and we're out of buns. So, like, I was like,
They were like French fries.
I was like, what? I was like, you're a chicken place. What are you talking about?
I don't think Popeye's crazy.
How do they stay open? Like why don't they just close?
They have like
What-
they have like shrimp and stuff.
They get really busy with it. Like they get
Yeah.
Popeye's is also another
no-go.
When you're sick, you get KFC mashed potatoes.
I love KFC. KFC was always a treat growing up. We get like once a month.
I eat KFC like every day. If I wasn't broke, I'd probably go there often.
I'm a grown up now. I can go myself.
Well, then go.
I could go every day, yeah. Has anyone had In-N-Out and Whataburger? You had them both? Which one's better?
The In-N-Out, like,
No,
Yeah.
yeah. Like the In-N-Out, like, sauce is beyond good.
The sauce for the burger or like the fries in?
I think it's called like monster sauce or something. I don't know. It's good. But yeah, I think In-N-Out's good.
I think In-N-Out's a bit overrated. I've never been there, but too much. I think we need a Sonic.
Oh yeah.
I've never had a Sonic.
Really? I went to Florida with my family, like to visit my family down there last year, and I ate Sonic every day a week. It was the only thing. It's the only place that has it, and I tried it, and I was like, yeah, I really like this. So then we went there every night.
I just think it's just
But the lines are always so long. There's this like fast food sushi place down where I live, and oh my gosh, it's so good. It doesn't believe it.
So are they pre-made? Like how's it fast?
No, it's just like
Because sushi fast, it doesn't sound like a good combo.
yeah, but I mean like they catch it right there and stuff. Like there's not really much transportation of fish. Ooh, yeah. You just like cut the skin off, slap it, throw it on a plate, so it's not eat it. Depending on what you're getting.
Okay, I feel a little more comfortable about that. Sound like gas station sushi.
Oh. What's your favorite fast food place?
Oh, that's so tough. So I think Arby's is super underrated. It's not my
Oh
favorite.
my God, my
though.
dad loves Arby's nuggets. The only thing good there is the
I
fries.
Curly fries are
I wanted
awesome.
to say that.
Yeah.
I work at Arby's.
My roommate made fun of me the other day for saying that, so I like had to bring it up here.
I like the.
I don't know, probably KFC.
Oh.
Okay, we can get back to it now. So we talked about scarcity already, but let's look at the difference between scarcity and poverty. So poverty is an arbitrary line we set that we say is the basic standard of living. And if you're below the poverty line, you don't have enough material goods to meet that basic standard of living. So this can be eradicated. As a society, we can become wealthy enough that everyone moves above that line. It could be, I don't know, over time, it's going to change. As people become wealthier and societies become wealthier, even like 10 years ago, having a cell phone, not having a cell phone wouldn't put you below the poverty line because enough people didn't have them. But now that pretty much everyone has a cell phone, not having one is considered like being below the poverty line or a sign of being below the poverty line. You can have an absence of poverty. It's tough because the more like wealthier a society becomes, the more we think everyone needs. But you can't get rid of scarcity. There's always going to be too few resources to create what we want. Because we have these unlimited wants. So scarcity and poverty can be considered kind of similar because if you're living in poverty, you're suffering from an extreme scarcity. But obviously they're very different because poverty is arbitrary. It's basically our idea. Yeah. All right. So, the existence of scarcity requires rationing. Again, we need to, every society needs to ration their resources. Tons of different ways to do that. The next, competition is everywhere. There's limits on wants and there's choice among alternatives, and these give rise to competition. Because there's only so many resources to build Apple phones and Samsung phones, companies that build those phones are going to have to compete over resources. Even in a world without greed, we'll still have competition, or even if there's no greed involved. So say you want to give all your money to charity. It's a thought experiment. Should you donate to Relay for Life or the Red Cross? Again, I mean, there's other choices. I just picked two to keep it simple. Yeah, you could do half and half. But, or you could think, which one is going to do more with my money? Or is there a third charity that will do more with my money? Those two charities have to compete over you because there's only so much money that you have. And there's only so much money out there that they can use to do good. So even if we're looking at pure altruism, there's still competition. And changing the method of rationing isn't going to eliminate competition. It's only going to change the form that it takes. So in the Soviet Union, they were centrally planned. They didn't have firms competing against each other. They had state-owned firms. But they still had competition. So if you wanted to rise up the ranks in the Politburo, you had to know the right people. When Stalin was young in like the very early Soviet Union, he would stay after like the meetings and sweep up. And he'd use the opportunity to like talk to people and to like, show off his work ethic. And it paid off as he moved up higher and higher. You had people, workers trying to rise up through the collective firm, or the collective production unit, whatever they called it, by trying to get to know the bosses, become friends with their family, that kind of stuff. There's still competition to move up in life and try to get more. It's just going to be somewhat different than you'll see in a free market. The next is that opportunity cost, the cost incurred by not enjoying the benefit associated with the best alternative choice. I have an example here. Yeah, so every single activity has a cost. And even if it's free, there's no money, there's still a trade-off because you can't do something else in that time. So after work today, let's say I only have 3 hours to myself. I can use that to go to dinner or movie. Let's pretend there's no COVID. This example doesn't really make sense right now. I can go to dinner or a movie. There's not enough time or I don't have enough money to do both. So the opportunity cost of whatever I choose is going to be that other option, the one I don't choose. And the reason opportunity costs exist is because of scarcity. Because there's not enough hours in the day and there's not enough resources for us to do everything we've ever wanted to do. Obviously, opportunity cost is subjective for each individual person because the alternative is never acted upon. So if I choose to go out to dinner instead of a movie tonight, I will never actually go to that movie, so it's subjective. I don't have the same opportunity cost as any of you if you were choosing between two options tonight because the options we're looking at are different. Yeah. So if you look at the cost of education, cost obviously includes tuition, right? And the cost of books for the few you buy. But then there's other things like time and sleep. These are opportunity costs. You could be doing other stuff with your time instead of sitting here in class. You could be sleeping. You could have made income if you got a job instead. So if you could have had a job of making $30,000 a year, you'd have a $30,000 a year opportunity cost. You could be missing out on a vacation. There's tons of other things you could be doing right now instead of going to school. These are all opportunity costs. And because each of us are different, have different wants, come from different situations, these opportunity costs are going to be different. For some of you, it might be hanging out with family. For other people, it might be flying to Europe. Now, the implications of opportunity cost, something that comes out of that is marginal analysis. And by marginal analysis, I mean when you're looking at a change, you're looking at a decision, you have to look at the next unit. Instead of considering all or nothing, you're looking at like purchasing the next unit. So when we analyze costs and benefits of actions, we'll use marginal analysis. So instead of talking about weighing the choice between like all clothing and all food, it's that next meal or that next shirt. So marginal benefit is the benefit you get. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Are we gonna have to do all the like math and graph and stuff?
What do you mean?
Like, I don't know, like there's, like I took micro in high school and there were like these big charts and you had to like fill everything in.
Oh, no. Yeah, even in 102 where we talk about like consumer choice and stuff, and for like production, you don't have to like fill those in. At least in my class, I don't know if the other professors do. For this, we're just talking about the general idea of marginal costs or marginal benefits. You think of the next unit. So marginal benefit is the benefit you gain from consuming that one extra unit. Oh, sorry, I thought you were raising your hand. And marginal cost is the cost of that next unit of the good you purchase or the activity you do. So yeah, so the focus of economics is that marginal choice, is that next unit. So the firm's trying to decide if they want to produce more. They don't consider, are we going to produce nothing or are we going to produce 100 units? They'll say, all right, we're running 99 right now. Should we make this next one? Are we going to sell this next one? Or is it going to be too expensive? Okay, so what does this marginal analysis mean? What do these costs and benefits, opportunity costs all mean? So individuals will engage in activity if their expected marginal benefit exceeds their expected marginal cost. Basically, if whatever they do is going to make them better off than they were before, they're going to do it. And the reason why we say expected is because, as I mentioned earlier, people can be wrong. They can think something's going to be great. They buy it or they do it. They find out it's not as great as they thought it was going to be. I think pretty much everyone here has buyer's remorse at some point, right? Think it's going to be great, you buy it, and it turns out it sucks. That's pretty common because we don't have complete knowledge. You never know until you actually do the thing. And likewise, individuals can be expected to refrain from activity if the expected marginal cost exceeds the expected marginal benefit. This doesn't mean that it's going to be easy to predict what other people are going to do. Individuals weigh expected costs and benefits differently. We all have a different set of goals, different set of wants, different set of needs. So because of that, it ends up being difficult to require people to do, to make the choices that you want them to make. I don't think we'll get to it today, but we'll be talking about that a little bit more next week. This also leads us to the law of diminishing marginal benefits. So the more you consume of something, the less benefit you're going to get from that thing. So who in here likes pizza? Everyone likes eating pizza? The first slice of pizza is great. You take a bite into it, you taste the cheese and the sauce, you get like the nice crispy crust. But you eat that, you start to get, you fill up your stomach a little bit. You get that nice second piece, it's not as good. You get the next piece, not quite as good. Over time, it goes on and on until you're so stuffed. And for this person, I guess they just moved the 11th on the left. So for the 11th slice of pizza, it's a negative utility for them, negative benefit, because they're so full it just hurts. Even if there's like a good taste, they're so stuffed. It's like the competitive eater, like at the end of the round. There's just no room left in their stomach. Okay.
First, is this like worldwide, like every industry pretty much has this?
Yeah.
Or are there some outliers?
Now, it's not always going to follow like that kind of slope, but eventually you'll reach negative marginal benefits. If you think of clothing, eventually you're going to have to build a new closet or take something out of a room and fill that room full of clothes. It could be ridiculously far out on like the quantity, the x-axis, but eventually it's going to be more costly to get that last unit. And for most people, say for like the clothing example, because of the opportunity cost of like what you have to give up, eventually like you're not going to have money to like eat or to like pay the taxes on your house. So then you'll end up with negative marginal benefit.
The other one, like innovation, I guess, or new technologies, new advancements that sort of counteract the conventional increasing them.
How are you thinking that would work?
So, I buy a computer, it's pretty good, and maybe like a year or two later, it's not that good, but something new comes out and runs it in and it's all good now. So that first initial purchase is
That's kind of like, I don't know, value for money.
Yeah, I don't know if that would relate to diminishing marginal benefits. That's really interesting. I'll have to think more about that. anytime you mention like innovation, I'm gonna, perk up and think about it. I'll have to think about that more. But, so, when we think about public policy, I'll bring that up a decent amount for examples just because I work doing research for public policy. Like that's one of my areas. So, it's not should we have something or should we eliminate something, but it's how much should we have. So not should we spend money on education or should we spend no money on education. It's how much. Should we spend a little bit more? Should we spend a little bit less? Should we get rid of all crime? Or should we tolerate a little bit of crime? What should that level be? If you think about it, it'd be great to live in a society with no crime, but the cost of doing so, where 0 crimes are committed, would take like all the wealth we have. So what's the optimal level? What are we willing to live with? The next one is incentives matter. This is hopefully the most important thing you'll learn in this course. That people respond to incentives. Incentives are what drive how humans act. I want to make sure I'm not like repeating stuff to you guys, but the textbook has the same introduction for 101 and 102. So I'm going over these slides twice. But, so if I said this before, just cut me off. But the economist Ludwig von Mises wrote his book, like his magnum opus, like the peak of his career, all the knowledge he's gained about economics. He called it human action, which is why I capitalized that. Because, that's what we're doing here. We're not just allocating resources, we're trying to understand how humans act. So now, when the cost of activity rises, we'll do less of it. Because it's relatively more costly. That's how these incentives work. And it becomes relatively less costly, we'll do more of it. And it goes the same for benefits. If we get a greater benefit from doing something, we'll do more of it. So for some examples, you increase the cost of milk, fewer people are going to buy milk. For some people, it's still going to be worth it at a higher price to buy it as much as they did before. Some people may buy less. Some people might buy none at all, depending on how big the price increase was. If you increase the cost of running a soup kitchen, maybe there's a new regulation that they need nicer stoves. I don't know. Maybe it needs to be a certain size. You just require them to renovate. Whatever it is, if you make the cost more expensive, you're going to see fewer soup kitchens. When there's rainy weather, fewer people go out to vote in elections. There's the increased cost of dealing with the rain. It's actually a pretty decent sized drop off. Okay, we'll run through this topic real quick before we get out of here. So, people respond to incentives. Obesity's been rising in America, and there's a ton of reasons. Change in the food we eat, how much we exercise, decline in manual labor, aging population. Something else is people tend to have more health insurance. This just shows how many more people are obese from 1994 to 2013. People with health insurance have less incentive to stay healthy than people without health insurance. People with health insurance are going to have some of their healthcare costs covered, whereas if you don't have health insurance, you're paying everything out of pocket. Some researchers went and they looked at this, and they held constant all these other factors, like age, gender, income. So basically, they take two people, exactly the same in every way, besides whether they have health insurance or not. For those two exact similar people, the one with health insurance was more obese. Because it was less costly to make these poor decisions, or like poor eating decisions, they ended up being obese because they were responding to incentives. It was far less costly, so they were fine doing it. No, I'm not going to keep you over on a Friday. We only got 3 minutes left. So, you guys have any